I'm really pleased to introduce someone who is known to many of you, Solana Rice. She was previously the Director of State and Local Policy at Prosperity Now, and she's co-created a new venture that Padmini had mentioned earlier this morning with her colleague Jeremy Greer, who's also formerly with Prosperity Now, and it's called Liberation in a Generation. And it seeks to advance the economic liberation for people of color and help close the racial wealth gap within a generation and ensure that people of color are able to build and preserve their wealth for themselves and future generations. So I won't say more because Solana's going to tell us all about her great idea. And with that, I'd like to introduce Solana.
Great. Hi, everyone. How are you? Good afternoon. It is so great to see so many familiar faces and smiling faces. It's just a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. And thank you, Mona and the Bay Area Asset Funders Network, for allowing this moment to happen. So what I'm going to do is just spend about 15 minutes, actually, to tell you about a fairly big idea. And it's a co-creation. My co-founder, Jeremy Greer, and I, about a year ago, looked at each other and we said, all right, we've been doing this work. We have a combined 40 years of experience in the asset building, economic security, financial security, racial equity space, you know, all the things. And it's time to go out on a limb and make this happen. So what I hope, actually, is that you all hear parts of your work and your interests in this as I go through, and that's very intentional. When we started this organization back in March, just in March, we did about 100 conversations with folks like you, several of you in the room, and across the country to make sure, like, were we crazy? Is somebody else already doing this? Is this really needed? Is this really needed in the field? So with that, I'll just jump right in. We always have to state what the problem is. Without intervention, median, Black, and Latinx wealth will be zero by the middle of the century. Okay, so zero. And I say that in large part because we always have to state the problem. California, by the way, is leading the way, right? Median wealth for households of color is 6 times less than that of white households. Income poverty for households of color is nearly twice that of white households. The percentage of both renters and homeowners of color spending more than 30% of their income on housing is about 6 percentage points higher than their white renters and homeowners. Now, you know, many of you all know me. You know that I have been in this kind of data and in this work for a long time, right? Probably longer than I look like I have been. And this is only, I say this problem in large part not because we always have to state the problem, but in large part because this is a personal issue. And you might think, oh, it's a personal issue because you're a Black person, right? Yes, of course, it's a personal issue because I'm a Black person. But also because I was at an organization that was responsible for putting together these data points. Day in and day out, we look at these things and we figure out, okay, let's say it from this angle and maybe they'll pay attention. Let's say it from this angle and maybe they'll pay attention. And at a certain point, you get sort of up to your ears with data and you're like, yep, okay, like, we get it. And when we came out with this, Jeremy and I said, wait, let's get this straight. By the middle of this century, the country will be mostly people of color. By the middle of this century, if we don't do anything, our climate will be pretty broken, and Black and Latino people will have no wealth. Where are we going? So this is not only a personal issue because I am a Black person, but also because I am responsible for creating a different future. I am responsible for not only characterizing the problem, but doing something about it. And I think most of us feel that urgency and feel that sense of responsibility. For us, we also had to tell a different story about why this exists. So Jeremy and I were colleagues at Prosperity Now. Many of you are familiar with Prosperity Now. It was formerly CFED, based in DC, working for 40 years. It's a 40-year-old organization on racial equity and financial security for low-income people. More recently on the racial equity part. That's enough said. So we felt like we weren't really telling the story. When we were there, we weren't really telling the story of why that data point exists. We couldn't be clear about why that data point exists. And it wasn't that poor people can't save, because we ticked that off. Remember, Derek said we had some great leaders saying poor people can save. Great, tick. We weren't saying that it was because it's political, which in part it is. We weren't saying, there were a whole bunch of things that we weren't saying, right? And what we feel like we need to now tell the story about is that racism is profitable, right? So racism is profitable in this economy, and that means that the suppression of economic vitality of people of color is also profitable. And so we felt like we were working on providing opportunity for people to navigate broken systems that depended on their economic suppression. So it's a little bit like pushing water into the ocean with a broom. You're like, I know, I just saw that wave is going out. No, it's coming right back. It's coming right back. What we also weren't able to say is that the results of being economically suppressed is the suppression of political power. So all of a sudden, if, in a very simple example, if I am incarcerated because I am poor, which is very likely, I also have my voting rights taken away as a result. And that political power is necessary to changing the rules that govern whether or not we want to live in a place where racism is profitable. So it's just magical cycle, right? And we say like, oh, how do we stop this? Well, so Liberation in a Generation is looking to intervene in between the suppression of political power and our ability to influence democracy and the rules that govern whether or not racism is profitable. And this actually goes back to an earlier point that Derek made, which is we can't leave it up to our corporations to say that they're gonna act in the benefit of everyone, right? There has to be some interjection, right? And this is where we've decided to disrupt. We haven't decided to disrupt ending racism. We're just not there yet. Talk to us in like 20 years, maybe we'll be there. And before, I will say, like when we were at Prosperity Now, I felt like we were working on the suppression. We were in part working to undo suppression of economic vitality, but we were talking about opportunity, an opportunity to save. What many of you might not know about me is that I actually came into the asset building field as a recipient. So I had an individual development account. I was living in St. Louis. This was 20 years ago. I had just graduated from college. That gives you a marker of how old I am. And I wanted to get a laptop for graduate school. So I saved my little dollars and I went to MIT and I got a planning degree. And you might say, that's a success story. Look at that, you did it. I came out with $20,000 of student loan debt, which I'm still paying off, right? So we are helping folks to navigate broken systems. Wouldn't it be great if I could tell you that story and say that I'm standing in front of you without student loan debt? We don't live in that world yet. So Liberation in a Generation is looking to characterize this system in a new way and just be clear about it, because we actually think it's important for not only our solution sets, all of the solutions that you all are coming up with and focusing on in your communities, but it's also imperative for our political power. It is imperative for our political power as people of color to be clear about the economy that people are navigating. And what we've seen is when we tell this story to folks who are retail workers, who are food workers, fast food workers, they appreciate being told the truth because this is the experience that they are going through. So, Liberation in a Generation does three things. We've decided to take on 3 activities and pivot from what we were doing in 3 different ways. One is a new story of the economy, which I've just laid out for you in part, and I will go more into in a minute. It's also a bold policy platform. Again, Derek set us up so well. He is on our governing council, by the way, so it's no surprise that we are on the same page. But we need bold policies, right? He gave you several of them. We've included that on our those things on our platform: baby bonds, federal jobs guarantee, guaranteed income, and more. So we include healthcare issues. We include ending mass incarceration, and I'll go into a little bit about how our platform is divided. Third, we want to build political action. This is a time where we cannot act like the racial wealth gap is political. The racial wealth gap is very much political. We have to take on electoral moments, and that is scary when we're a C3. We're a C3, but we're also a C4. That can be scary, right? Because now we're talking about not only building the economic power, we're talking about building cultural power with a new story, and we're talking about building political power. And we feel like we cannot do one or the other. We can't just say we'll just focus on story, we'll just focus on narrative, we'll just focus on one policy. We really feel like we need to do them all at the same time. And Jeremy and I have the connections and all of you all to help move that forward. So it's not just us. I love that Mona said it was my idea. It's all of us, and we're all pushing this forward, right? So in part, a new worldview is what we're after, one that clearly calls out elite institutions for the existence of economic oppression. And with that, we feel like there are 2 things that we have to do. One, dismantle an oppression economy that we are currently living in, and building a liberation economy where all people of color belong. And so with that, I just want to make sure that I know what's next. Yeah. So what do I mean by dismantling an oppression economy? So we feel like there are 4 pillars right now, and these are pillars that policies can sit under and values that policies can sit under. And you all can visit all of our policies on liberationinageneration.org. So dismantling oppression looks like ending mass incarceration, ending the dual financial system. I navigate a very different financial system than my white counterparts. Curbing corporate power, right? We talked about that earlier. And ending the political disenfranchisement of people of color. A liberation economy is one where we haven't seen people. Someone asked me the other day, well, what do you think the heyday was for people of color? And I was like, we haven't seen it. So we're in uncharted territory, right? We just, that hasn't, yeah. People often ask me, like, what time era would you love to go back to? There are no eras that I want to go back to. I'm going forward. We're going forward into liberation. So a liberation economy has 4 tenets for us, where everyone's basic needs are met, where all people of color find safety and security, where all people of color find value and are compensated for their contributions to this economy, and where all people belong. Right? And belong has become it's a buzzword here in the Bay Area thanks to the Haas Institute, but it's real. Like, we experience it in the economy. We experience it every day when someone says, yes, you have a 720 credit score, you get to do this. Oh, great, I feel like I belong, right? And there are micro ways, and then there are big ways. I get to buy a house. That's a huge thing around belonging, right? So these are the basic tenets, and I lay these out because these are actually probably the more important pieces than even the policies themselves, because if we can't agree on these tenets, then we start arguing about minutia in policy that sometimes undercut all of these values, right? So what we're trying to do is put out a vision about what this economy should do and what it currently does not. I mentioned the third part is leveraging local political power. We are using political moments as a time to galvanize, because we feel like the narrative and the story about the economy has gets a lot of play during our electoral moments, right? We have candidates traipsing around the country saying, like, vote for me, but we haven't heard what the racial and economic platform is that we should really be backing these candidates on. And we want to make sure that as organizers welcome candidates to their door, that they actually have a set of values and a set of economic issues that they are interested in, that they are calling to question. All right, that's great. You're about X, Y, and Z. What about these national issues? And yes, I represent Oakland, or yes, I represent Alameda County, but guess what? I have a voice in the national discourse as well. And that's what we want to make sure that organizing groups feel like they have. So our theory of change is really, we are a movement support organization to make sure that organizing groups, the people that are building power in communities, are armed with a very strong economic platform that they can get behind, that is in line with their values. So I'll just say a little bit about what we're doing in California, just to make this a little bit more tangible. We're working with several organizations, and when I say working, actually, we're having conversations, because this is all a relationship building. The fact that I come from an asset building lens, and I'm swooping over and jumping over into political organizing, is no small feat, right? Jeremy and I are absolutely continuing to build these relationships with organizing groups, because that's what it takes within the electoral moment and even beyond the electoral moment. Our hope is that we are engaging activists across the country, but specifically in California. We've had really good conversations in Florida as well. In California, we're in conversations with Pico, California, with several of the folks in the donors roundtable, groups like the folks down in San Diego, the folks in Engage San Diego, and the Inland Empire. These are all groups that have done tremendous, tremendous organizing, and they're like, we are finding value in having some kind of national stance on economic issues. And so that's what we're built to do. So what that looks like is actually having workshops with their activists, talking about this worldview, sort of dismantling how we got here. It also looks like identifying opportunities when candidates come. What are you all saying? What are we pressing on? What are the questions that we're asking? What we hope is that doing that work with organizing groups and in regions will actually influence the national policy discussion, right? And at the same time, we've got to have a national frame. So as an organization, we are also pushing out the same conversation, the same story that we are actually iterating on as we hear back from organizing groups about what's working, what's not working about this story. So it's not static. It's not, here's your policy platform, go advocate for it. The organizing groups are going to tell us what's going to resonate with their people and what people are really excited and energized about. So over the course of time, you'll see the policy platform that we have on liberationinageneration.org may change, because we may hear from communities, all due respect, Derek, baby buns, nah. And that's okay, because we have many, many other policies. Or maybe, yes, baby bonds, but in this format or in that format, right? So that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to build these relationships, which is no small feat, making sure that we are listening to organizing groups and consistently iterating and pushing what we're hearing back out to a national level. And we do think that over time, within political cycles and electoral cycles, and even outside of electoral cycles, that is what's going to change our narrative. That's going to change what we think is possible in this economy, and eventually, that's what we think is going to change the rules of our economy. So with that, I will end just by saying, liberation in a generation, the name is indicative of what we're trying to do. Many people say, well, don't you want to shorten it? That's really long. It's a very long URL. No. It's very intentional, right? We are identifying oppression, and the opposite of that is liberation. In a generation means that not another generation should endure economic oppression, right? We think it's possible. We didn't get here overnight, but we actually are a very wealthy, powerful nation. And people of color deserve to reap the benefits of that power. And so it also dictates to us what we need to do, because all of the things that we aim and aspire to do need to accomplish economic liberation within a generation. So we want to collect all the good ideas and all the transformative ideas, but we know that our target is absolute economic liberation within a generation. So with that, I will end, and I'm happy to share more details and answer questions. Thank you.
So if you have a question, just raise your hand.
Hi, Solana.
Hi,
nice to
Lena.
see you and enjoyed your presentation. And with the idea of, just stand up because I'm kind of in a corner, with the idea of thinking about informative, innovative and transformative ideas around political action or policy, policy, I've often struggled, and I think you have the policy chops, the data chops to really help me understand this issue. I've often struggled with, as a nation, why we have the same level of poverty. You know, when we talk about the poverty rate. No, that's not what, in this country. And it's the same for the 50 states. Yeah. When we know the economy of Mississippi is very different than Hawaii, than California, than New York, would that be a solution or a way to really ensure that more, for lack of a better word, entitlement subsidies go to individuals living in states that have a higher cost of living, if we really just individualize how we calculate the rate of poverty in this country?
Yeah. Yes, I do think that we need better systems for accounting for real cost of living. And at the same time, we need solutions that bring down outrageous costs of living. Right? The idea that, like, we can't just take for granted that it's really almost impossible for anyone to move into the Bay Area. That is not okay. And so we do have to have some kind of mechanism. So it's like, yes, and we need to have mechanisms that rein in the lack of opportunity, the real economic oppression that people are facing. So we shouldn't take poverty as an okay. And yes, we need to, in the short term, like we were just talking the other day about, well, what does a basic income, how far does a basic income go in the Bay Area versus in a Mississippi, right? And how would you account for that? And that's actually one of the things that we want to talk to organizers about whether or not that energizes their base, is getting into these policy details. So it is a balance of like, what are we seeing at the national level and what is viable versus not even what is viable, because we're not about having the viability debate. We're about having like, what do people really need debate. And we're at the point where we shouldn't have poverty at all. And so let's figure out what states really need and what people in states really need, and go from there.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Marcia Quiñones, and I'm with the Marin Community Foundation. Really enjoyed what you're sharing, and I'm wondering, many of us are really used to the relationship between funder and organization in terms of a C3. So direct service, we're cool with. It took us a while, but we're cool with organizing now too. But when you start talking C4, I see people getting nervous. Can you talk a little bit about your decision to go into the C4 area and what kinds of barriers you find or you have found among donors and foundations in supporting the work in that?
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. We started a C4 in large part because we recognized that there were things that we were going to need to say and do that were partisan. And honestly, we were kind of tired of being bipartisan. we were like, we are going to have to just talk to the folks and do direct actions with folks that are for these values. We really feel like building the political power of people that are behind those values is what is most important. Yes, everybody is like, what, this is too scary. Because I think that the fear is valid because it's real change, it's the actual change, it's the power. And power is scary, right? Especially because a lot of donors and philanthropy have benefited from this cycle, right? And so we are asking people to step out and step in a very different way. We had a conversation with a set of funders and like, ooh, but how am I gonna get my board on board with this? This is a lot. Not our problem. Not our problem. We're not trying, and actually one of the funders said very deftly, we're not going to make you navigate our board. We're not centering institutions. We're going to center this work. And so the C4 piece was on purpose as well because we do want to make sure that we have the tools to compare candidates and really say, like, we're not endorsing anyone, but when you're public about your policy platform, here's what we're stacking you up against our platform, right? How do you stack up? And we felt like some of that has to be done, and also just being in with organizing groups that are supporting candidates and trying to figure out how they're changing the frame around what they're talking about. We felt like we had to do it. I will be very candid. The C4 fundraising is difficult and tough. We've had much more success on the C3 side. We think we will draw in folks to the C4, but any recommendations and guidance is more than welcome.
Carol Fife, Ace Action, also a fellow C4 fundraiser for campaign funds, so welcome to the club. It is extremely difficult, but it is so necessary. And I think in order, and I would like to know how you approach this, because one of the challenges that I run into when trying to raise C4 dollars is that there's not a real honest dialogue in philanthropy about how contributions create the outcomes that we see, right? So how do you plan on having that truth-telling conversation with the folks that can make or break your organizing work?
Yeah. Our strategy so far is to get the people who are willing to be vulnerable, like really have the real conversation, and get them to have the real conversation with other people, right? Because the funder to funder, donor to donor conversation is much more powerful than me saying, like, this is what you should be doing. And we don't need to be in that conversation in that way. So we've really been trying to gather not only funding support, but just like moral support in the work, and saying, because there are people that are like, look, you're right. I'm ready. This is bonkers. I'm ready. I'm out. let's do this a different way. And we're trying to make sure that we keep those folks close to open other doors. But again, there's so much more work to be done. Like, would love to chat about how, yeah. Okay.
Great. So please join me in thanking Solana.